pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which is one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I know Mrs. Claudia is anxiously awaiting, so I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Tussey. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our last budget workshop. I'm not sure where that little thing disappeared. Never mind. Okay, since the tax cap was enacted in 2012, school districts follow a very specific formula to determine their budget each year. First, we calculate our restricted tax levy, which is the amount we're allowed to collect in taxes. Then we factor in state aid that we expect to receive. Next, we add in any other revenue that we expect to generate. After that, we include the appropriated fund balance, which is the money set aside for the following year's budget. And finally, we consider any funds we plan to use from our reserves. When we add all these pieces together, we get our expenditure budget for the upcoming school year. Our district's fund, there are three main sources of revenue that school districts can earn. Property taxes are the biggest source of local revenue. The amount we can collect is set by the tax cap, which limits how much we can levy each year. State aid is the second major source of revenue for school districts, which can either be formula-driven, such as foundation aid, or it's expense-driven, such as transportation or BOCES aid, which simply means you receive aid the following year after you incur the expenditure. The third source of revenue comes from various local revenue streams. Some examples include pilots, which are payments in lieu of taxes, non-resident tuition, and rental income. Pilot payments are where a commercial property owner makes payments instead of paying property taxes for a negotiated period of time. We have one pilot in this district, which is a veterinary office on Sunrise Highway. Our district's funding profile consists of approximately 69% coming from property taxes, just over 24% coming from state aid, about 2.8% in other revenue, and fund balance and reserves makes up 3.8% of our funding profile. As you can see, we are a district whose primary revenue source is property taxes. Before we get into the details of the budget tonight, I wanted to take a moment to review some key terms related to school taxes. The tax levy is the total amount of property taxes that a district needs to raise each year. For the 2025-26 school year, our tax levy will be $96.3 million. It's also important to understand that the tax rate does not equal the tax levy. The tax rate is used to calculate how much property owners will pay in taxes. To calculate the tax rate, we use a formula that takes three key numbers into account. That's the tax levy, the final homestead assessment values, and the homestead percentages. The school district provides the tax levy, but the town of Islip actually provides the other two numbers, which are the assessment values and the homestead percentages. But we receive these numbers every October. Since we do not have all of those numbers that we need yet, we provide an estimated tax rate during our budget process. Our estimated tax rate for the 2025-26 school year per $100 is $21.56. The assessed value of a home is a percentage of its market value. The town of Islip determines this percentage through what's called an equalization rate. For the 24-25 year, the equalization rate in West Islip is 7.28%. So this just means that the assessed value of a home in West Islip is 7.28% of its market value. I often mention the average assessed home in West Islip having an assessed value of $45,000. So that just simply means that the home's market value is approximately $618,000, which you can see here. I just did with that formula in the middle of the screen. In Suffolk County, the total property value is divided into two categories, which are homestead and non-homestead properties. A homestead property is simply a 1, 2, or 3 family residential home, a condominium, or a vacant land that is 10 acres or less. Non-homestead properties are typically commercial properties. The proportion of homestead versus non-homestead properties helps determine the total property value in the town and how it's divided, and this influences the overall tax rate. As you can see on the chart on the bottom there, West Islip has a homestead percentage of 90.34%. This means that the majority of the property value in our district is classified as homestead, and therefore our local homeowners bear the most of the tax burden for funding the school district. Just for some context, I put together this chart to show you the homestead and non-homestead percentages for the 9 school districts in the town of Islip for the current school year. They're listed in order of the lowest homestead percentage, which you can see is Hauppauge School District at a very low of 47.75%, all the way to the highest of 90.34%, which is West Islip. The average is around 74.75%. With such a high homestead percentage, West Islip homeowners contribute a significant share of the tax levy, which means our district relies heavily on local property taxes to fund our schools. The proposed tax levy for the 25-26 school year is $96.3 million, which represents a 3.07% increase over the current year's levy. As we work to develop a balanced budget where our revenues equal our expenses, we face several challenges that created a significant budget gap for the upcoming year. One of the biggest challenges has been inflation. Like many of you have probably experienced personally, inflation is impacting nearly every aspect of our operations, from supplies to services. To put things in perspective, over the past 4 budget cycles, our tax levy has increased at less than half the rate of inflation. The average consumer price index increase during that time has been 4.94%, while our average annual tax levy increase has only been 2.09%. This gap between inflation and our revenue growth has made it very difficult to keep up with rising costs, and it's one of the key reasons why we had to make tough decisions this year to help close our budget gap. This slide explains how the 2025-26 tax levy will impact the average homeowner. As I mentioned, to calculate the actual school tax rate, you actually need 3 different numbers: the tax levy, the final assessed values, and the homestead percentages. Again, the school district only provides the tax levy. The final assessments and those homestead percentages come from the town of Islip, but we don't receive those until October. Since we don't have those numbers yet, we provide an estimate. Based on these estimates, the average homeowner in West Islip would see an annual increase in taxes for school of $295.20, which breaks down to about $24.60 per month. If you'd like to estimate your own property tax increase, the formula is actually shown in the little yellow box there. We also put it in our budget newsletter that goes out. This slide just shows a comparison between the state's 2025-26 executive budget proposal for state aid and our 2024-25 current school year budget. At this point, unfortunately, the final state budget has not yet been released, so these figures are still subject to change. The state did guarantee a minimum 2% increase in foundation aid for all districts, so we are seeing that increase reflected in our numbers. However, most of our other expense-based aids, such as excess cost and building aid, we are projecting decreases in. As a result, our total state aid is currently projected to decrease approximately $313,000. Again, we're still waiting for those final numbers, so these might change before our final budget is adopted. This is a look at our district's other revenue sources. Pilot payments, again from that veterinary office, are expected to increase about $13,000. Our health services revenue is actually projected to decline. That's mainly due to this change in student enrollment at private schools that are located in West Islip. So just as an example, enrollment in the private schools in West Islip has dropped more than 11% the 23-24 school year and the 24-25 school year. And because enrollment can be unpredictable, we actually use very conservative estimates when projecting this revenue. But on a more positive note, interest income is actually expected to increase about 33%. And overall, we are looking at a projected increase of about 2.04% in our other revenue sources. This slide just shows an overview of our district's fund balance and the different categories, which are 4 key components. We have non-spendable, restricted, assigned, and unassigned. All the dollar values that you see are as of the last audited school year, which is the 2023-24 school year. Fund balance represents the total accumulation of operating surpluses and deficits since a district's inception. The non-spendable portion, the one all the way on the left, that includes the value of inventory and prepaid items that are usually in the school lunch fund. The restricted portion of fund balance is made up of reserves designated for a very specific purpose, and they cannot be used for general operating expenses. Reserve funds provide financial stability for districts by reducing the need for borrowing. They help us avoid drastic cuts or tax increases during difficult financial times. Strong reserve funds also help us improve our bond rating, which actually lowers our borrowing costs when we go out for capital projects. In our district, we have 7 restricted reserve funds. They are the Employee Benefit Accrued Liability Reserve, the ERS and TRS Reserve, the Workers' Compensation Reserve, Unemployment, and 2 capital reserves. The assigned portion of fund balance is made up of appropriated and unappropriated fund balance. Appropriated is the amount of fund balance that is set aside to help fund the upcoming budget school year. That's typically $850,000 for our district. The unappropriated portion is just used to carry over purchase orders from the previous fiscal year that have not yet been fulfilled. And the last part of fund balance is that unassigned, all the way on the right, portion. It's often referred to as the 4% balance because it cannot be more than 4% of the subsequent year's budget. This portion represents surplus funds that are not restricted, they're not assigned, and they basically serve as a financial cushion for districts for emergencies, one-time costs, anything other than ongoing operating expenses. This slide focuses on the 5 of 7 restricted reserves that we have, because these are the reserve funds that can be used as a revenue source to help us close our budget gap. As of the last fiscal year, the total balance of these 5 reserves is approximately $20 million, which is the first column you see there. For the current school year that we're in, we're appropriating $4.4 million from these reserves. Not including any required interest or potential fund balance allocations, we are projecting that the balance at the end of this school year will be about $15.7 million. For the next school year, 25-26, we plan to appropriate $4.4 million. This increase includes a larger appropriation from our EVLR reserve due to our teacher retirement incentive that was recently offered. Again, I just want to point out, which I mentioned in the last budget workshop, that the expected payment for the teacher's retirement incentive is added to our expenditure budget as a compensated absence expense. However, that same amount will be coming from the EVLR reserve, so it's a wash, so it's budget neutral. We also plan to appropriate $700,000 from the TRS reserve, which will leave about $77,000 left in this reserve for next year. In addition, we are appropriating $2 million from the ERS reserve to cover pension costs for next year. We will be using $425,000 from the Workers' Compensation Reserve, essentially using the remaining balance to cover our expenses for next year. We will not be appropriating any funds from the Unemployment Reserve as future costs are just too unpredictable at this time. So as you can see, between this year and next year, we will be reducing these 5 reserves by nearly half, as we have used these funds for the past 2 years to help close our budget gap. So this is just a summary of that same budget formula that we saw on the first slide, but this is just showing West Islip's budgeted amounts for the current school year and the projected amounts for the 25-26 school year. For the upcoming school year, As I mentioned, our proposed tax levy is the $96.3 million, which is an increase of just over 3%. Again, we factor in our state aid, and we are using at this time the governor's initial executive budget proposal because that's all that's out there at this time. And we are looking at a slight decrease in our aid for state aid. We then include any other revenue that we expect to generate, which is projected to be about $3.8 million for next year. And after that, we account for any funds we intend to appropriate from reserves, which we just went through, is at $4.4 million. And finally, we add in that appropriated fund balance, which is $850,000. So when you add up all of these components, the total expenditure budget for the 25-26 school year comes to $141.4 million, which is about a 1.93% increase over the current year. As we take a look at our budget breakdown, it is divided into 4 categories: instruction, undistributed, general support, and transportation. The instructional budget codes are all of the direct expenses that support our K-12 instruction, including both regular and special education. And this, of course, takes up the largest portion of the pie, accounting for about 53.13%. The undistributed budget codes cover the costs related to employee benefits, debt service, capital projects, and the district's share of funding a summer special education program. This category represents just over 30% of the budget. We have general support, which covers the cost of the district's overall management and operations, which include the Board of Education, legal services, insurance, auditors, and the costs associated with the human resources, superintendent, and business offices. This represents just under 12% of the budget. And lastly, we have the transportation budget codes, which are all the expenses related to transporting our general and special education students to and from public, private, and parochial schools. And transportation is about 4.87% of the budget. So as you can see, the majority of the budget is dedicated to ensuring that we can provide quality instruction for our students, followed by the necessary support and services to keep the district running smoothly. Balancing the budget this year was a challenging task, and it required some tough decisions. However, these decisions were made with careful thought and a focus on minimizing the impact on student programs and services. One of the first steps we took to address the budget was relocating all of our pre-K classes from the 2025-26 school year to the South Shore Children's Center in West Islip. This move freed up valuable space in our school buildings, allowing us to prioritize our K-12 instructional programs. By doing this, we were able to also reallocate district staff to fill important roles, such as adding a literacy coach at the elementary level and reinstating 1 computer teaching assistant in each elementary school. The current pre-K staff will also be reassigned to address the increased enrollment and section sizes at the elementary schools. Additionally, the Board of Education offered a retirement incentive to our teaching staff, and 23 teachers have taken advantage of this opportunity. Of these, 9 will impact the 25-26 budget, and 14 will actually impact the 26-27 budget. We are also absorbing several positions through attrition, meaning that these positions will not be filled, but will not result in layoffs. This includes 1 nurse and 4 teaching positions. To help reduce costs, we found efficiencies within our administrative staff as well. For instance, we're combining the role of the Assistant Director of Technology with the Director of School Counseling, which will help lower our administrative expenses. Unfortunately, we also had to access 9 teaching positions for next year. Further budget reductions were also made across all areas, including reducing supplies and cutting back on both instructional and non-instructional equipment. While these cuts are difficult, we are committed to minimizing their impact on student learning and ensuring that we continue to provide a high-quality education while being fiscally responsible. And lastly, we were able to balance the budget by renegotiating some of our lease agreements with our tenants, which also helped to reduce costs for the 25-26 school year, as well as long-term increases in revenue for future years. This slide is just highlighting some of the major items that are included in the 25-26 budget that will enhance educational offerings and support our district's priorities. We are restoring an elementary literacy coach and computer TA positions, so we will have 1 in each elementary building. As I previously mentioned, these roles will be reinstated through the absorption of the UPK positions. We are investing in a new elementary literacy program that is aligned with the science of reading approach. We're adding a speech pathologist at the elementary level, addressing the growing need for speech services as we add 2 self-contained 811 classes next year. In the area of career and technical education, we are introducing Welding 1 and IB Design Technology at the high school. The district is also making strategic investment in artificial intelligence for all grade levels, K through 12. Dr. Kylie Brendan, who's our Executive Director of Technology and Innovation, he coordinated demonstrations of various platforms for staff, with some teachers and students piloting programs this year to evaluate their effectiveness for the upcoming school year. While some platforms were priced very high, some upwards of $175,000, others were much more affordable, ranging from $20,000 to $30,000. After careful evaluation by staff and consideration of student feedback this year, School AI, which is priced at about $23,000, was found to be the best fit for our district. This investment ensures we're advancing technology in a cost-effective and thoughtful way. This budget also includes funding for a new district website and cybersecurity initiatives, which are vital to maintaining both accessibility and security in our digital infrastructure. Our district website is currently managed by Syntax, but we were notified this year that they will no longer be providing that service for the upcoming 2025-26 school year. Therefore, we have already begun with preparations to transition to a new website host for the upcoming school year. So while we will experience a slight reduction in our Syntax costs for next year, those savings will just be offset with launching our new website with a different provider. We will continue pre-K through 12 professional development focused on core instruction. And lastly, we will be expanding our ICT program at Beach Street Middle School to now include 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. These are the projected average class sizes for the upcoming school year. You might notice they have changed slightly since Budget Workshop 3. There is now 1 additional section at Manitouk, which is grade 2, and Okonock, grade 3. We will continue to keep an eye on grade 3 at Manitouk and grade 2 at Okonock because we currently are at the cap. And similarly, in grade 3 at Paul J. Blue, we are also at the cap. So we will continue to monitor enrollment. As a result, there may be shifts in the number of sections in grade 4 and 5 if enrollment does increase. But just keep in mind that these are estimates as we are still in the process of reviewing students' needs through the CSC and CPSC evaluation process. So changes may occur as we finalize staffing and enrollment. On the ballot that you will see in May when you go to vote, we will have 2 propositions. Of course, the first is for the school budget, and the second will be for the use of the capital reserve. We will also be voting to elect 3 board trustees. We will have a capital reserve proposition on the ballot, which will allow us to use funds from our capital reserve for a project at the West Islip High School. We are planning to install electronic locks and card access readers for classrooms and bathrooms at the high school. The estimated cost for this project is $700,000, and that is a not to exceed authorization, just meaning that we will not spend more than that amount. If there are any unspent funds, and there usually are, we usually typically come in under budget, those funds are simply returned back to the capital reserve. And most importantly, there is no additional cost to taxpayers when you do a capital reserve fund project because it is funded entirely through the existing capital reserve. So for 2025-26, as I mentioned, we have 3 board trustee seats open, and the nominating petitions for those seats are currently available at our district office. And the deadline to submit them is April 21st at 5 p.m. Although schools will now be closed on that day, district office will be open, so you can come and submit those applications through 5 p.m. We are adopting our budget on April 23rd, and our public budget hearing will take place on May 6th. And of course, on May 20th, it's our budget vote in the high school gymnasium between the hours of 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. Does anyone have any questions?
I do have a question.
Hi.
If the district does get additional funding back from the state, will you consider bringing back any of the excess positions?
So that's certainly something that we will discuss, once it's really tough to, talk about the hypotheticals just because, as Ms. Pilati mentioned, the governor's budget was due April 1st. But, we're now April 10th and there doesn't seem to be any sort of end in sight. I would say that when we look at those excess positions that we do have there, there are some of them that are just that. We do believe that they are excess staff that we can still run our programs, except have slightly larger class sizes, but that it doesn't have an impact to student programs. Whereas we do have some cuts, like for instance, in the area of our library media specialists, we have 3 cuts in that area, which really kind of bring us to the bare bones in our libraries. We'll have 1 high school library media specialist, 1 library media specialist split between our 2 middle schools as we have this year. And the shift is 2 things for next year in the proposal, which is that rather than have our 4 library media specialists at the elementary level, we would have 2. So we'd have 1 library media specialist at our 2 North elementary schools and 1 library media specialist at our 2 South. That also does include 1 of our tech integration specialists, which is also in the that seniority list for library media specialists there. So we'd be looking to have 1 tech integration specialist as opposed to 2 in next school year. So that's one of the areas where it is a slight cutback, or it is a cutback in our program itself. That I think we've kind of earmarked as like a first area to take a look at. However, there are other factors at play as well, because as we've seen, there is $4.4 million being allocated from the reserves, and our goal is long-term to put ourselves, on a path where we're actually utilizing less of our reserves each year, because if we find ourselves in situations where we're trying to overcome that gap each year, we have to try to narrow that with any additional money we get as well. So it's certainly something that we will consider if we do wind up receiving additional funding. It's just unfortunate that we don't have that on April 1st. We can start, so we can have those types of discussions here because it's uncertain. We don't know if we're going to be receiving that funding. So I hope that was somewhat of an answer to the question. I know it's kind of back and forth on different things, but we will certainly consider it. And we're just waiting for more information.
Thank you, Mrs. Pilati. I just think one of the highlights of it was on the page where you compared last year's budget to this year's budget. So the highlight there is the actual expenditure budget is only going up 1.93% in an inflationary time where inflation is at minimum 5%. So you've done a great job of managing to that. And when we look at what we're spending the money on, I think we're really targeting the programs that we want here, and that keeping it under 2% increase in this inflationary period is quite a feat, so I appreciate that.
If you don't mind me just adding, I think that's something that this board has always been committed to, and I know that the central administrative team is as well, is staying within the tax cap. That's something I know that we have done since its inception. And you will hear about other districts over the course of the past few months. There were initially 0 districts planning to pierce the tax cap, but a number of districts have been coming out saying that is something that they plan to do. Because I think that, throughout this budget process, they have realized that, they're facing some similar challenges and that they've moved to that direction, which, we've made a lot of difficult decisions in this budget process, but that hasn't been a direction that we've talked about going in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. We are going to head over to the library.